This lecture is on weeds. There's an entire class, Integrated Pest Management Principles in Weed Science. And we're definitely not going to teach all of weed science, but I'm going to give you just a primer here. Maybe you will take that class. I highly recommend that you do get some integrated pest management principle exposure and education. I think it's beneficial for a lot of you. We have integrated pest management principles in entomology, insects and other creepy crawlies, and integrated pest management principles in plant pathology, plant diseases, things like viruses, bacteria, and fungus are the pathogens that cause diseases, and that's pathology, the study of the pathogens. So those are the three areas of our IPM classes, ABT 81, 82, and 83. Look into them. But for now, I'm going to give you just the basics of weeds. So what is a weed? A weed is a very subjective, human-defined thing. A weed is just a plant that we consider, for our own purposes, a problem plant. Now, there are more than 3,000 species of herbaceous and woody plants that we call weeds for one reason or another around the world. And they're plants that would be good at spreading into your agricultural production, into your businesses or home gardens or wherever you are. Things that will spread into areas you don't want them. Well, what do plants normally do to survive in nature? They spread, they plant their seeds. That's the way a plant survives. And it doesn't know if it's an open field or a wild mountain hillside or your front lawn. It just is going to grow. And so plants do get out of place, some more so than others. And that's why some are considered weeds, some not so much. So essentially, a weed is a plant that creates a problem or is undesirable or simply out of place. So if we've got poison oak growing in the backyard, we would call that a weed because it's an undesirable, potentially problematic plant. A lot of people are allergic to poison oak and it's very uncomfortable. But even lettuce, is lettuce a weed? It is if it's in my cotton field, and where I grew a lot of lettuce seed crops was in cotton country in the Central Valley of California. And so I'd lease some land from a cotton grower, go plant my lettuce seed crop, and in the process of harvesting all that lettuce seed, a whole bunch of lettuce seed would end up on the ground and come up in his or the farmer's cotton fields next spring. It was a weed to him. Weeds cost farm producers billions of dollars annually in not only crop losses, because weeds will compete for the nutrients, they'll compete for water, they'll compete for sunlight, they'll compete for root space. And some weeds actually are going to be pretty good at chemically creating these chemical warfare zones in the root zone, helping the weeds grow and inhibiting your crop plant. They outcompete in the root zone. So even if they're not stealing as much water and nutrients as you think they might be, it's like, oh, they're not stealing that much. They still might be reducing the growth of the roots and limiting the growth potential for your plants. So lots of reasons we could have crop losses. And then the cost of control itself. We need to drive tractors through to cultivate out the weeds. We need to use herbicides or other techniques. In organic farming, there's very few things available that are considered effective weed control chemicals. There are some, if you do the right weed at the right application timing, some things can kill the weeds, but they're not very good, not very persistent. So in organic farming, I would argue that one of the biggest jobs of any organic farmer is weeding. The day you decide to be an organic farmer is the day you start weeding. And the day you retire is the day you stop weeding. And between those 2 points, you're weeding all the time. With conventional growing, it's a little bit different because you have more effective conventional herbicides that can handle some of the weeds, but it's still a big problem. Suppression of weeds along highways, right-of-ways, along irrigation canals, parks, public grounds, all kinds of places, billions of dollars more in weed control outside of the obvious agriculture industry. All of these other situations have weed control, and some of them are pretty noxious, like this star thistle, an invasive weed that's taken over a lot of area in California. You can see these thorns, very, very painful. And I've experienced it numerous times out in wild fields of cross-country motorcycle riding. You don't want to run across a field of star thistle, hint, hint. Maybe you recognize this one. It looks like a nice, soft-looking plant. And it feels soft at first touch. And it's sometimes referred to as Salinas toilet paper. Just kidding. This is a stinging nettle, and it has these extremely tiny, soft hairs, and they're only soft feeling at first because they are so tiny, but really they are short, toxic needles that are microscopic needle tips that will enter your skin and cause a rash or irritation. Stinging nettle. Some people are very sensitive to it, others are not. This is puncture vine, and you can see why it's called puncture vine. When these seed pods dry, these spikes get very hard. I actually ran over a puncture vine behind Safeway on Constitution. There's some bike trails in that area around Safeway on Constitution. 2 flat tires instantly, and I had to walk home to Prunedale. That was a long ass walk, but I kept good spirits about it. I had nobody to call at that time. We're talking, I don't know, 97, long time ago, but I had a nice walk. Weeds are also major causes of allergies, things like ragweed because of all of the pollen. And it's not just weeds, but even acacia trees. Actually, acacia trees can be considered weeds. They act like weeds at my house. The acacias are hard to get rid of. They are so good at spreading. Some weedy plants cause pain and suffering, as the case of poison oak, poison ivy, poison sumac, thistles, sandburs, nettles, and puncture vine. So a lot of potential problems. Some weeds serve as host to plant diseases. And actually, it's plant pathogens would be the more appropriate word here. A pathogen is an organism that can cause disease. Disease is the response. So for example, the flu virus is a pathogen, and the disease, the flu disease, is what happens when my body is responding to it. The disease is my own body's response. The pathogen is what causes it. We'll talk about that on another day. Weeds can be home to insect pests. So the insect pests will hang out, live in the weeds, and then come out and attack your crop, either to eat your crop or spread pathogens into your crop. They can be vectors of disease. So what do? They decrease your yields. They can impair plants' growth. They can harbor insects and diseases, increase in growing costs because you're trying to control these weeds. Injury to livestock and people. We talked about poison oak, poison sumac, poison ivy, but livestock has many things that can be a problem when they're eating things that have thistles. It can cause problems in their mouth or get into their gut. Some things are poisonous. It blows my mind how good horses are at living in the wild and taking over certain places in the wild. There's some beautiful wild horse herds in various places in the United States. yet you own a horse and you look at them cross-eyed and they can drop dead on you. Horses are notoriously easy to have a serious and expensive or lethal problem. And there are certain kinds of weeds that will kill your horse. And you need to know that if you have horses or other livestock as well. Some things are not so much. I don't worry too much about goats. Seems like goats can eat damn near anything. Haven't raised goats before, so I can't tell you that for sure, but seems like they can't die if they eat anything. But horses, not so much. Cattle also have some problems. Decrease in product quality and or value. So some examples, I've had weeds that have caused heads of lettuce to deform because the weed kind of pushes just ever so lightly on one side, causes that head of lettuce, instead of being round, to kind of be misshapen and twisted and ends up not being harvested. There's a whole head of lettuce lost because of weeds. Some weeds can get into your crop. So baby leaf spinach, if you find out that you have nettle growing in between your baby leaf spinach, how the hell are you going to get that out? You can't be serving bags of baby leaf spinach to your customer with nettle leaves every once in a while. So you might have to throw away the whole thing or have an inspection crew, which is extremely expensive. You harvest your crop, you send it across the line and have people pick out the defects. Lots of potential problems. Persistence of weeds. Many weeds will produce large numbers of seeds. In one study, they found that pigweed can produce up to 117,400 seeds. Amazing reproductive capability. Russian thistle, 24,000, lamb's quarter, 72,000, and tumbling mustard, nearly 10,000 seeds. So tremendous ability to explode in population. And so one of the rules with weeds in general is you need to control constantly, and you've got to get them before they go to seed. Because if you let them go to seed, you miss an opportunity to control weeds at one point and you're back to square one. You got to start over because now you've got lots of weeds in your field. Longevity, seeds can live for years in the soil. The general rule of thumb that I have used over the years is that it takes about 5 years of good control of your weeds to get a handle on it. So 5 years of good hard work and never screwing up with your weed control, and you're then in the driver's seat 5 years later. Any one of those years you screw up and you're starting the clock over again. And it's not just in your field, it's even immediately adjacent to your field. But you can't blame the neighbor down the road. There's not a whole lot of weed seeds that generally go huge distances. There can be some, and so weeds will pop up here and there in your field from somebody that's upwind from you. But those are small numbers. The vast majority of weeds come from your own screw-ups or either in or immediately adjacent to your field. The dissemination or spread of weeds from one area to another is highly varied. There are lots of ways that seeds will spread. There are seeds with barbs or hooks that become attached to animals in their fur, in your socks or shoelaces, whatever. Actually, a type of a burr is the inspiration for the invention of Velcro. Look it up. The socks are made by loops of thread, and that makes a nice, comfortable sock. And the burrs have hooks all over the surface of their seed shells, the seed coats. And the seed coat with all these hooks on it grabs onto the hooks, or excuse me, the hooks on the seed coat grab onto the loops of your socks. And so hook and loop, Velcro, was invented. Seeds eaten by animals and birds can be spread widely, so they The seeds are hard and can go through the animal's gut and be softened through the gut, but not digested. So by the time it comes out the other end, that seed is then planted with a nice little load of moisture and fertilizer, all softened and ready to go. Wind can travel 2 to 15 miles. Rains or streams carry seeds. The entire plants may move like tumbleweed. Roots or stems can be a mechanism to move a plant as well. And I didn't prepare for this, but let me just look at this one video here. I'm typing in maple seed helicopters, and I'm going to look at videos. And I used to do this with little ones. Here's the maple seed, and you can see that the seeds have these very specialized, elongated, almost like winged supports. And I thought the video was right here. Fine. I'll go straight to YouTube where I don't have to search for it.
The spectacle of science is taking place right now, and maybe in your own yard if you have a maple tree. Kansas has several species of native maples. Most common statewide, the silver maple has large flat seeds that mature in late April.
And I'm not going to worry about all the things he says here, if you heard that at all. But look at how the seeds, as they are falling, they act like wings. They are winged shaped, and they get caught on the wind and they swirl. And if you have a decent wind, they can be carried for a long distance. Now, that wasn't very good. There you can see it whirling and spinning in slow motion. There it goes. It's on the wind. You can see it cruising along. That's one of the better pictures. So there was a maple tree, is a maple tree at Echo Valley School near where I live. And so what we would do is that thing would be loaded with these maple seeds. And so we would take the seeds, gather them and clean them up and make big old bags, big old lunch bags filled with them. And if you have a 3 to 6 year old, you give them a bag of that and have them throw them up in the air, and they'll be happy for hours. Great activity. They're really fun. You throw them up in the air and there are all these little helicopters flying down around you. If you do it in the wind, you're going to lose a bunch. But again, very, very cool. Very, very cool. Tumbleweeds. You know, I always think of a story of somebody that I knew in college at Chico. And here you can see tumbleweeds gathering in this poor people's front yards in various places. But my friend in school was being chased down a roadway, had nowhere to go, but the wind was blowing hard at her back. And she's on her 10-speed flying down the road with this tumbleweed, this big ass tumbleweed chasing her down the road. But as they're tumbling, the seeds are falling off, and they can tumble for miles in the wind in these large flat areas. This is something that you would find in the Central Valley and certain places here in the California Central San Joaquin Valley area. Not the entire San Joaquin Central Valley, but certain regions of it are notorious for tumbleweed activity. So I'm going to take a quick break and come right back.